part of the human condition means loving a good origin story. We do it with all our autobiographies and researching of family trees. We do it with word etymology and the genesis of ideas or organizations. I feel like a primary need of the human heart is to rifle back through the past to find out the place and the time that someone or something big started off. There's this fundamental drive for genealogy. I think the book of Acts is the church's equivalent of a genealogy. We go all the way back and find out how it is that we started, the first days of the church, what happened at the very, very beginning of it all for us as Christians. And there is some unbelievably amazing action that we see in that book of Acts, starting with the story that we usually tell at Pentecost, the ecstatic coming of the Spirit that happens right before the passage we heard today. That first ever gospel revival is described in these big wild words. There's a wind that blows through. There is imagery of fire, and the Spirit is tangible and touchable. People are bewildered and amazed and perplexed, and the crowds around think that it's a huge open-air drinking party because it's so loud and so large and so out of control. Then Peter stands up and gives the kind of sermon that most of us as preachers can only dream of giving. He weaves in the Hebrew scriptures with Jesus' life and moves people powerfully with his speech. And 3,000 people join the young Christian community. This is wild stuff. But it doesn't end with a mad, emotional revival. The passage we read this morning describes the Christian community in its fledgling days in a calmer, quieter way. But oh my goodness, it is beautiful. They are gathering together. They are doing theology. They are living together. They are eating together. They are praying together. And they depend on one another. This is a kind of community that most church leaders would give their eye teeth for. And while this part of the story is not as noisy as the revival from earlier, it has its own reckless beauty. The new Christians are literally giving everything away that they have so that no one will be hungry or homeless, and doing it all in awe and with gladness and joy, and the community just keeps growing every single day. Such an experience of community requires a radical commitment to one another and a willingness to let go of one's own agenda for the sake of the common good. Acts chapter 2, verses 42 to 47 is a passage in a story I know well and have known since a very tender age. You see, just as many young children of a certain generation sat on their mother's knee and were regularly read the 23rd Psalm or the story of the lost sheep, my mother used to regularly read me this Acts passage as proof positive that God's politics were of the left-wing variety. But if you read it carefully, it is not so much about communism as it is about commonism. Not about everyone getting doled out the same portion, but about everyone sharing in the commonly held resources. And we see in the description of the community's activities a five-fold embodiment of the gospel. Number one, this holding all things in common. Number two, teaching and searching together the scriptures, the writings. Number three, fellowship. Number four, breaking of bread. And number five, prayers. And while there is talk of spending time in the temple, there is also, in a way, a parallel to our present situation, with people sharing in their homes many of the practices of the Christian faith. Interestingly, there's no mention of organizational structures. The church council meeting doesn't even get a passing reference. And neither is there any kind of recognized leader, be it pastor, priest, minister, or shepherd. No one person was in charge of the crowd or the flock. Leadership was very much a shared thing, as were all the worldly goods and resources owned by the community. And each day, more people were being saved. Some wise member of a Bible study group once asked me, when all these people were being saved, Maggie, what exactly were they being saved from? I didn't have an answer at the time, for I am not, nor have I ever been, of the school of thought that those who turn to Christ are being saved from hellfire and damnation. But later, upon reflection, an answer came to me. When people turned to follow Jesus and become part of the Christian community, they were being saved from a life of self-absorption. And such saving comes at a cost. You can't just do what you want anymore. The needs of others have to have an equal footing to those of self, and sometimes they must even come before one's needs. Our faith, our belief in God, and in the equal value and rights of all people, call us to face the world and our choices in an altruistic kind of way. We are called to consider our purchases and their implications for the health of our planet and its people. We are called to give generously when we would rather hoard and accumulate. We are called to love and listen to others when we would rather amuse ourselves. And despite their foibles and their struggles, we are called to hang in with communities in which we find possibilities of God's grace and justice being shown and known. One of the many things brought home to us by the coronavirus pandemic is the incredible push and pull between individual rights and the common good, and how sometimes it is oh so necessary to restrict the former so that the latter might be served. And I guess that is what people mean when they say, we are all in this together. The reason I react negatively sometimes to that suggestion is that while we are all feeling threatened by the disease and our lives are modified and circumscribed, there is incredible variation in the resources we have at our disposal to weather this time of self-isolation and stress. For some have greater economic security. Some have better underlying health. Some have greater resources of inner resiliency. Some have more avenues for companionship and support. Some countries have better infrastructure and greater ability to provide for those affected. And as we have heard so many times, some have much safer places to shelter, much safer places to stay home. I heard a colleague minister, Mark Green, put it this way: we may all be in the same storm, but we are not all in the same boat. That's why some who have greater resources need to think about those who have less, need to find ways to share. Ultimately, we need to order our society so that we ensure each human being has what is essential for life. My sense is this is the vision that Jesus preached, and the vision that the early church lived into, one that seeks the common good. And maybe, just maybe, when we emerge from this time, we can carry with us the learning of what it means to sacrifice your own needs for the sake of others. The stories from Scripture tell of God caring for the least and the lost and the most vulnerable. The shepherd God who leaves the 99 to search for the one. The early Christian flock who so care for one another that they are willing to give away their all to ensure the well-being of each member of the community. This is our genealogy. This is our beginning. May it also be our future. Amen.